You were on a soundstage with, I think the first thing was a black box where you had your actors, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And this wasn't, again, I'm trying to get everybody up to speed here because I want to know why you.
I could help. I mean,
Sure,
you want
sure.
me to, so, it gets confusing when we talk about the particulars of it.
Right.
But I think the overarching vision for what we thought we should do here was, the task at hand was to make this movie appear to be a live action film.
Right.
Because the Disney animated classics were being remade as live action films, but clearly we weren't going to be doing live action singing lions. So that became the beginning of it. And Rob and I had just worked on The Jungle Book, and we learned a lot on that. And there was some consumer-facing VR hardware that had come out towards the end of that. And we started messing around with what you could do with this essentially video game technology and uploading files that we would use in digital animation into VR and be able to actually walk around. And we thought, wow, this is really interesting. If we were starting Jungle Book, we would be using this instead of the traditional old motion capture gear that we were inheriting, for the most part, without much change since like Avatar, which was 10 years earlier. And then when the idea of doing Lion King came up and applying this technology to that, we thought it's the perfect way to take animated performances and what would have normally been done with an animation pipeline and use a live action crew to help make it feel like we were seeing something that was more real.
Right.
So that led to, as you're saying, the black box theater. So they did photography, and just to be clear, they were doing moving photography, but that was not plates. There's only one purely live action shot in there, which is the very first shot of the sunrise.
Right.
Everything else was created by CG artists, digital artists. Every performance was done by animators. So if you look at the end credits, you'll see we have our live action crew, but also everything that you would see associated with like a Pixar film as well. So a lot of artists' work went into it in order to be made to look invisible.
You actually reversed the process. Instead of doing performance capture of the actors, you were doing kind of reference footage.
We were doing performance capture of the cameras.
Right.
So every animal was keyframe animated like they would have done for Bambi. And instead of doing like what Rango did, which was have just cameras as reference, we actually encoded all of the camera work that Caleb and Rob were doing. So it started with me with the actors not at music stands, if we could ever help it, and have them in a black box theater with just some video reference for the animators and usable sound. And I would have them improv, overlap, and everything that was dictating the performance was coming from them. The animators would then get that. Andy Jones would get that.
Right.
Do animation of all the action of the film, and then we would be using VR to scout the locations that were built based on all their reference and uploaded digitally. And so in scouting, which is when this process was most valuable, 6 of us, all the department heads, a live action crew, would be in there together scouting, except instead of looking at a little screen, we would walk around and we would talk like we were on a tech scout.
I was lucky because I came in after the daunting decision that Jon and Rob made that they could actually pull this off. And I just had to, be put into this real world that Rob and the people from Magnopus had created all these tools that are exactly like the tools I've always used. I mean, they're, dollies, cranes, and, I had gear heads, and I had the camera, and I could set any lens I wanted and everything. And then, the advantage, obviously, is that I could move the sun around and change the lighting, and we could pick one of 350 skies we had in our library. And and initially, when they would do the animation, sometimes in the early stages, some of the sets weren't quite finished, and an animal would suddenly walk through a rock or something like that. But after about the first month or two, the animation got really sophisticated to the point where you really could read the emotions and everything, and you could make all the decisions that you would make when you're making a regular movie. And then we also had a certain amount of freedom too, where any one of the tools that we have, whether it was a gear head or a fluid head or a dolly or whatever, could be repurposed to do something else. And you could actually hook a lion up to it and speed them up slightly. If they were two lined up and you wanted one slightly ahead of the other, you could just put that movement on a dolly as well. And so, it became really inventive. I mean, we just started, it started out very conventionally, and we kept thinking that, well, we have a dolly grip, but we had a regular grip doing it, but he wasn't really a dolly grip. So we ended up being in a real dolly grip who's used to moving with animals. And then, the computer would follow the focus, and that never felt right to me. So I brought in my regular first assistant, and he followed focus, because there's a certain art to that, the way you move into something and the speed and the tack in which it takes. It's the whole thing. And so it gives it a feeling that there's somebody behind the camera watching, the way you watch a movie. There's a certain point when you're watching when your attention goes from one thing to another, and that's when, a really good camera operator or an assistant, draws your eye to something. And that was all built into it because of, Jon and Rob having the confidence that they could actually pull this off, which is pretty. Thank God I didn't make that decision, because I started getting worried at various times along the way.
So Rob, talk a little bit about that decision and your conversation with Jon, as far as what tools that you knew what he was going for, and you're working together to come up with this system, which is almost a flip side of what had been done in the past, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, it's a bit of flip side. I think I was hired because I was the king of human imperfection. And that's why Jon picked me, I think. Actually, what you really want in something is to remind you of films you've seen before, and that quality that is intangible, and part of it is there's a human operator behind the lens, being the audience, shifting focus when you need to shift focus, shifting focus in the scene when you need to do that, and you have to block it out for these moments. So the idea, what we did on Jungle Book, is that we had a portal into the virtual world, but not walk around in it, and it changes as soon as you put the goggles on. You see in 3 dimensions. When you take a step, it takes a step, and it's all, there's no latency whatsoever, so you feel and you get used to it very quickly, and you start becoming a director and a cameraman and the rest, because you walk over to the better shot or the one that's more interesting. And so it intangibly has everything you've ever done before in your live action life is transmuted into this particular way. So what Jon wanted to do and I wanted to do is to totally lean into the analog nature of shooting. And that is live input, and you're going to make a decision based on what you're seeing, and you may alter it when something happens that you were not expecting, and then don't get rid of it. Don't perfect it. In live action terms, you always try to make everything perfect. The dolly move has to be perfect, the focus has to be perfect, and it just never is. It's as close as you can get. In the computer, everything is perfect, but you don't want it because it sterilizes the scene and all that stuff. So everything, and when we reached a point where we were even mimicking a Steadicam, and then it's like, screw it. Get a Steadicam operator, because if you want it to look like a Steadicam operator was operating it, get a Steadicam operator, and it was that simple. And so the part of what we leaned into is we cannot improve on the 100 years of movie making. It just can't be done. No matter how you shake it, you need to rehearse, you need to get live input. Actors and directors and cameramen and production designers look at something and go, oh, I have a better idea, let's do this. And you cannot, and you do take after take until you hit the movie, till like that goes in the film.
The other part of this is the voices, and I know that traditionally in animation, like you say, there were lockdown stands and sometimes individual recordings of individual actors. I know you had Billy and Seth record together. I don't know if that happened with other actors or not, but there was also the ability to move and to allow them to feel more a part of a body performance along with their voice performance?
Yeah, I mean, I've always, motion capture is very good for certain things, but I found that the most useful part of motion capture, if you were translating it to a non-anthropomorphic animal, was mostly that you're inheriting the choices that the actors are making. So in a traditional animated film, you would have a voice performance, and maybe they would look at, like from Robin Williams, it's, you see they would videotape him, and clearly the animators were inspired by that. Or Gollum, You know, that was pre-motion capture. Andy Serkis would make certain choices, and the animators would keyframe matching in with that. But for the most part, what you'll see if you go to an animation house is they'll listen to the voices, and they'll have a mirror next to their monitor, and they'll make faces, and you'll get performances that feel fine in animation, but it's very exaggerated if you saw it in a live action film. And so I wanted to eliminate the temptation to go bigger with their voice or with their performance. And I wanted all the timing and overlapping that you don't get when you're doing it alone. And we tried to do it with as many actors as we could. We would do pickups later at music stands, or if people like Donald Glover for some of the sessions was doing solo in London, so we would get him and Chiwetel together in London. So we did everything we could, but under the best circumstances, we would have it basically look like a theater performance. We would be in a black box theater. Everything would be mic'd, and I would have them, and then I could let them improv, and we could really have a lot of fun. You know, there weren't that many areas with a movie like Lion King where you could take liberties without undermining people's expectations of the title. The comedy, Timon and Pumbaa, things like that, where we felt that we had some free running room, we went crazy with it. The takeaway is something that really puts the technology on a pedestal and shows the state of the art of what could be done. Because as you point out, it's not the computers doing it. This is the most handmade movie I've ever worked on. And these tools that they have available allow the artist to hand paint every frame, every performance, every facial expression, every blade of grass, every environment is built. It is a hand-painted tile in a big mosaic. And so what I'm most proud of is how the whole team came together to present this thing that feels seamless and allows you to ride the same emotional journey the original did, but presenting it in a different way that hopefully doesn't feel redundant to the original.
Congratulations on balancing out the art and the science.